Tell me the UK media cannot stop using the Duchess of Sussex for attention without telling me. Because here we are again. Another day, another royal headline, another moment where everyone has to look twice and ask the obvious question, wait, why is the Duchess of Sussex's face here? The article is about William, but somehow the image chosen is Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. And suddenly, the biggest story is no longer the story. The headline says one thing, but the picture says something completely different. It's almost like the media room has a little emergency button marked, "Need clicks? Add Meghan." And the funniest part is watching the same cycle repeat. For years, we hear that the Duchess of Sussex is irrelevant, that people have moved on, that nobody is interested anymore. Yet somehow, her face keeps appearing. The woman they claim nobody wants to talk about somehow keeps being placed front and center. That is not a coincidence people are going to ignore, because if someone truly believes a person is no longer important, they usually stop using that person's image as the main attraction. That's generally how relevance works. A revolutionary discovery, apparently. But somehow, in the world of royal headlines, we have entered a very special universe where the rules seem to work differently. A universe where someone can be called irrelevant while still being one of the most recognizable faces attached to royal coverage. A universe where the media can spend years saying, "We are moving on," and then immediately turn around and say, "Anyway, here is another article involving the Duchess of Sussex." It's almost like watching someone announce they are finished with a television show while never missing an episode. The dedication is honestly impressive. At this point, you have to admire the commitment, because keeping up a storyline for this long requires effort. There has to be planning. There has to be strategy. Someone somewhere is probably sitting in a meeting saying, "Okay, today we are discussing William." Someone asks, "Great, what image are we using?" And after a long pause, "Meghan." The room goes quiet. Someone asks, "But the article is about William." And then someone confidently replies, "Yes, but you know what gets people talking." And there it is, the little secret hiding in plain sight. Attention. Because at the end of the day, media is a business. It's built around engagement, around clicks, around reactions, around people stopping their scroll. And whether someone supports Meghan and Harry or not, one thing is very clear. The Duchess of Sussex creates conversation, a lot of it. And that seems to be the part some outlets struggle with. Because if the Duchess of Sussex truly had no impact, there would be no reason to constantly pull her back into the frame. The easiest way to prove someone is not dominating a conversation is to stop putting them in the conversation. But somehow, that step keeps getting skipped. It's like having a person standing outside a party saying, "I don't care about this party," while holding the invitation, standing next to the entrance, and telling everyone inside who they should and shouldn't talk about. At some point, everyone starts looking around thinking, interesting strategy. Because the audience is not just watching the headlines, people are watching the patterns. And patterns are powerful. One photo can be an accident. 2 photos can be coincidence. But when something keeps happening again and again, people naturally start asking questions. That is how human brains work. A shocking development, I know. People see repeated behavior, and they form opinions. Nobody needs a special royal degree for that. And this is why the image choice became the story. Not because people are obsessed with a photograph, but because the photograph told its own story. The article may have been about William, but the image immediately brought the Duchess of Sussex into the conversation. And once again, the media created the very discussion they then act surprised about. It is almost like throwing a match into a room full of fireworks and then asking, why is everyone talking about the noise? Well, you brought the fireworks. The audience just heard the explosion. And honestly, the funniest part is that the Duchess of Sussex does not even have to do anything. She doesn't need to make a statement. She doesn't need to appear. She doesn't need to enter the conversation. Sometimes the conversation comes looking for her. The name, the image, the attention, all by itself. And that is why people notice the contradiction, because if the argument is that the public has moved on, then the coverage should reflect that. The headlines should reflect that. The images should reflect that. But when the same person keeps appearing, people are going to ask why. That is not people creating drama. That is people reacting to what they are seeing. And maybe that is the biggest irony of all. The attempt to make the Duchess of Sussex disappear from the conversation keeps making her the conversation. The attempt to move past the topic keeps bringing the topic back. The attempt to lower the spotlight keeps turning the light back on. And somewhere, the internet is watching with popcorn because once again, the royal media machine has created a storyline nobody expected. A story about William, a picture of Meghan, and a comment section asking, did anyone else notice this? Yes, everyone noticed. And this is where things become even more interesting, because the royal media world has created a situation where the audience is no longer just consuming the news. People are analyzing the machine behind the news. They are looking at the choices, the wording, the photographs, the timing, the entire performance. Because, let's be honest, the modern royal news cycle is not just about what happened, it's about how something is packaged. The headline is the wrapper. The photo is the giant sign on the front. The comments section is where everyone comes in and starts debating whether the package was even necessary. And somehow, every time the Duchess of Sussex enters the picture, the entire conversation changes. It's almost like she has become the unexpected main character in a story where she wasn't even supposed to appear. The supporting character walks into the scene, and suddenly everyone says, wait, why are we talking about her? Exactly. That is the question. Because this keeps happening. And the funniest part is that the people creating the spotlight are often the same people complaining about the spotlight. It's a fascinating little media dance, a dance where everyone says they want to move forward, but somehow nobody can stop looking backward.
The royal coverage sometimes feels like someone trying to leave a room while continuously turning around and checking if everyone noticed they left. At some point you have to ask, are we leaving or are we just dramatically walking toward the door for attention? Because the audience can tell the difference. And that is where the frustration comes from. Not from one article, not from one picture, but from the repeated pattern, the constant return, the endless cycle, the same conversation wearing different outfits. A new day, a new headline, a new angle, but somehow the same familiar faces appear. It almost feels like the media has a royal bingo card. Mention a palace, check. Add family drama, check. Bring up the Duchess of Sussex, check. Watch the internet explode, bingo. Congratulations, everyone wins except the people who wanted a normal news cycle. And then there's this strange obsession with proving that Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, is somehow not important. Because here's the thing. People who are genuinely irrelevant usually do not require constant announcements about how irrelevant they are. Nobody wakes up and says, today I need to explain why this person nobody cares about should not be cared about. That alone suggests a certain level of attention, because if nobody cared, the silence would do the job. Silence is incredibly effective. A forgotten topic does not need daily reminders that it is forgotten. That's like someone walking into a room and saying, nobody here is thinking about me. And everyone turns around because now they are. It creates its own contradiction. And the Duchess of Sussex has been at the center of that contradiction for years. The media conversation around her has become the strange loop. Talk about her, react to her, discuss the reaction, then discuss why people are reacting. It's a never-ending circle, a royal media hamster wheel. Everyone is running, nobody is getting anywhere, but somehow the wheel keeps spinning. And then we get to the question of why certain images are chosen. Because images are powerful. A photograph is not random decoration. It sets the mood. It influences the viewer before they even read the first sentence. A smiling face creates a different reaction than a serious face. A familiar person creates a different reaction than an unfamiliar person. Media companies understand this. They know exactly what catches attention. So when people ask, why use the Duchess of Sussex's photo, they're asking a completely reasonable question. Because if the goal is to highlight William, then using William would make sense. If the goal is to highlight the story, then the image should match the story. Simple. Basic. Almost too simple.
Yet somehow, here we are. The internet has become a detective because the photo choice made people curious. People are looking at a headline and a picture that do not seem to match and saying, something feels off. And that feeling is what creates the conversation. The irony is that the Duchess of Sussex does not have to chase attention. Attention keeps finding her. And that is probably what makes some people uncomfortable, because no matter how many times certain narratives are repeated, public interest does not always follow the script. People make their own judgments. They notice things. They decide what they find interesting. The audience is not a machine that simply accepts whatever's placed in front of it, thankfully, because imagine if everyone just nodded at every headline they saw. The world would be very boring. Nobody would question anything, nobody would ask why, everyone would just scroll. And honestly, humanity has enough problems without adding everyone stopped thinking critically to the list. So when people point out these moments, they are not necessarily focusing on one photograph. They are pointing to the larger pattern, the strange relationship between the media and the Duchess of Sussex, the constant push and pull, the fascination mixed with criticism, the endless attention mixed with claims that there is no attention. It creates a situation where the audience starts noticing the obvious. The Duchess of Sussex remains a major conversation starter, whether the media wants to admit it or not. And maybe that is why the picture choice became so funny, because it accidentally revealed something. The very person some outlets claim people have moved past is still powerful enough to shift the entire conversation. One image, one headline, one comment section, and suddenly everyone is talking. Not about what was originally intended, but about why Meghan was there. That's quite the plot twist. The article had one mission, the audience gave it another. And once again, the internet said, interesting choice. Because sometimes the loudest message is not the headline. Sometimes it's the picture sitting right beside it. And the funniest part of this entire situation is that the Duchess of Sussex does not even need to be physically present for the conversation to happen. She could be quietly living her life, focusing on her family, her work, and her own projects, and somehow a completely unrelated headline still finds a way to bring her name back into the room. It's almost like the media has created a boomerang effect. They throw the story away, and somehow it flies right back with Meghan attached to it. Because at this point, the audience has seen this pattern enough times to recognize the formula. The words may change, the headline may change, the royal name mentioned may change, but the attention strategy feels very familiar. And that's why people laugh. It's not just about one image, it's about the absurdity of watching the same cycle repeat while everyone pretends they can't see it. The Duchess of Sussex remains one of those figures who can shift an entire conversation with a single photograph, and apparently that's something the media cannot resist testing again and again. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Smiley here, and take care.